For nearly 5,000 years, the burning sands of the Iraqi desert preserved the traces of the founders of the oldest known civilization, the Sumerians.
Long before Egypt raised its pyramids or Greece shaped its myths, a forgotten people built the first cities, wrote the first laws, and looked to the stars for answers. They called themselves the Sumerians, and their world, carved into clay thousands of years ago, still hides questions no one can solve. Who were these people who seemed to appear out of nowhere? And what secrets did they take with them when their mighty cities turned to dust? Maybe the clues they left behind still whisper through time. Where did the Sumerians actually come from? Of all the mysteries surrounding the ancient Sumerians, none is more baffling than their sudden appearance. Around 4,500 BCE, a sophisticated civilization rose seemingly overnight in southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, complete with cities, writing, agriculture, religion, and trade networks. Yet, there's a strange gap in the archaeological record. Before Sumer, the region shows small farming villages, but nothing that explains how such a complex culture appeared so suddenly. Historians have long debated where the Sumerians came from. Some believe they were indigenous to Mesopotamia, evolving over centuries from earlier local tribes. Others argue they migrated from elsewhere, perhaps the mountains to the northeast, or even the distant Indus Valley. What makes this question so haunting is that the Sumerian language doesn't match any known linguistic family. It's not related to Semitic tongues like Akkadian or Hebrew, nor to Indo-European ones like Persian or Greek. It's a true linguistic isolate, the oldest we know of. How could a people with a language so unique also pioneer writing, architecture, and mathematics? Their script, cuneiform, appeared fully developed by around 3,200 BCE, not as a rough beginning, but as a working system used for trade and governance. That's like discovering someone's first attempt at writing was already a novel. Some researchers have suggested even more far-out ideas. Could they have been survivors of an earlier lost civilization, perhaps one destroyed by a great flood? The very flood Sumerian myths describe long before the Bible's Noah? Others think climate change or conflict might have driven them south from a homeland that has since vanished beneath deserts or seas. Whatever their origin, the Sumerians set the foundation for every civilization that followed. They gave us city-states, written law, schools, temples, and time itself, dividing the day into 24 hours and the circle into 360 degrees. It's as if humanity hit a civilization reset button, and Sumer was the first new program to run. And yet, no matter how much we uncover, that first question still echoes. Who were the Sumerians before they were Sumerian? The next mystery only deepens the puzzle. How did they know so much about the heavens above? How did the Sumerians know so much about space? Here's something that still stuns scientists today. The Sumerians, a people who lived over 6,000 years ago, had knowledge of the solar system that seemed far ahead of their time. They charted the stars, tracked planetary movements, and built entire religious systems around the heavens. But how could a Bronze Age civilization have known things that modern astronomy wouldn't confirm until millennia later? Cuneiform tablets from ancient Sumer mention celestial bodies with remarkable precision. The planet Venus, for example, was closely observed by Sumerian priests who recorded its cycle in texts like the Venus Tablet of Ammisaduqa. These records are so accurate that NASA scientists have used them to help refine modern astronomical data. The Sumerians also identified 5 visible planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and distinguished them from stars, understanding that they wandered across the sky. But here's where it gets weird. Some Sumerian tablets and cylinder seals seem to depict a solar system with 12 bodies, the Sun, Moon, and 10 planets, including one that doesn't exist in modern astronomy. This mysterious 12th planet, sometimes called Nibiru, has sparked countless theories, from lost worlds to alien visitors. While mainstream scholars see these images as symbolic or misinterpreted, others argue the Sumerians knew something we didn't. Even their mythology hints at cosmic awareness. The Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, were said to have descended from the heavens to shape humanity. To the Sumerians, the stars were not distant lights. but realms of divine power. Their ziggurats, massive step pyramids like the one in Ur, weren't just temples. They were designed as cosmic mountains, bridges between earth and sky. Each level corresponded to a planet, with the top serving as a gateway to the divine. Could it all be coincidence? The product of religious imagination and early observation? Perhaps. But when you see how carefully they aligned temples to solstices and tracked eclipses with mathematical precision, it's hard not to wonder how they learned so much without telescopes. Whether guided by gods, intuition, or sheer genius, the Sumerians' understanding of the stars still feels eerily advanced. They didn't just watch the skies, they wove the cosmos into their daily lives, believing their fate was written among the stars. The mysteries don't end in the heavens. The next one lies buried beneath their feet in the very soil they built their world upon. Did the Sumerians survive the real Noah's flood? Long before the story of Noah ever appeared in the Bible, the Sumerians had already written about a flood, a massive world-ending deluge that wiped out humanity. This ancient tale, carved into clay tablets thousands of years ago, describes a disaster so devastating that only one man and his family survived by building a great boat. Sound familiar? In the Sumerian version, that man's name wasn't Noah, it was Ziusudra. Later, the Akkadians called him Utnapishtim, and the Babylonians knew him as Gilgamesh's ancestor. The parallels are uncanny. The gods warn him of a coming flood. He constructs an enormous vessel, saves animals and people, and eventually releases a bird to find land. Even the dimensions of the ark and the duration of the rain are remarkably close to the biblical story. What's more chilling is that archaeologists have actually found evidence of a massive flood layer in ancient Mesopotamia. Excavations in cities like Ur, Kish, and Shuruppak reveal thick deposits of silt between layers of human occupation, signs that a catastrophic flood once swept across the land around 2900 BCE. That aligns perfectly with the Sumerian king list, which states that the flood swept over and kingship descended from heaven again. So, what really happened? Most scientists believe it was a regional event, a massive overflow of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, possibly triggered by climate change or melting glaciers. But for the Sumerians, it was divine punishment. They believed their gods sent the flood to reset humanity, sparing only the righteous few to rebuild civilization. What's fascinating is how this story echoed through time. The Sumerian flood became the foundation for countless myths, from Babylon's Epic of Gilgamesh to the Book of Genesis and even the Quran. It suggests that this wasn't just a story, but a cultural memory passed down for generations, proof of a disaster that reshaped both the land and the human imagination. And so, from the mud and chaos of the flood, the Sumerians rebuilt. They created the world's first cities, invented writing, and redefined what it meant to be human. But as their civilization rose again, so did new enigmas, some written in clay, others in code we still can't crack. Because among their greatest mysteries is one that no scholar has fully solved. How could the first writers on Earth have invented a language so complex, so fast? How did the Sumerians invent writing out of nowhere? If civilization begins with the written word, then the Sumerians were its authors. Around 3200 BCE, they created something no one had ever seen before: cuneiform, the world's first known writing system. But here's the strange part: it seems to appear almost overnight. Before cuneiform, humanity had simple counting tokens and clay tallies. But suddenly, the Sumerians were writing full sentences, laws, prayers, poems, receipts, even jokes. The jump from counting goats to composing hymns to the gods is staggering. So, how did this happen? Their system began with pictographs, little drawings pressed into wet clay using a reed stylus. Over time, these pictures evolved into wedge-shaped marks, hence the name cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped. But what baffles researchers is how quickly it became so advanced. Within just a few generations, Sumerian scribes were using hundreds of symbols, grammatical structures, and abstract ideas, things that take centuries to evolve naturally in most languages. And here's another twist. Sumerian is a language isolate. That means it has no known relatives. It isn't connected to Akkadian, Babylonian, or any other ancient tongue. No linguistic ancestors, no obvious influences, a complete, working language that seems to come out of thin air. This has led to plenty of speculation. Some scholars believe that Sumerian developed from earlier, lost cultures of the region whose records simply didn't survive. Others, more fringe thinkers, argue that the Sumerians could have inherited the system from an unknown civilization, or even, as some conspiracy theorists' theories claim, from teachers not of this world. What's undeniable is the power of their invention. Writing allowed them to record history, laws, trade, and literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving story. It transformed memory into permanence, giving humanity its first glimpse of written thought. But with writing came control. The Sumerians used cuneiform to collect taxes, codify social hierarchies, and record the will of the gods. The first writers were also the first bureaucrats, priests, and historians, shaping how knowledge would be passed down for millennia. Even now, thousands of Sumerian tablets remain untranslated, tucked away in museums and archives, whispering secrets we've yet to decode. And if their words hold mysteries, their gods held even more, beings who, according to legend, shaped mankind itself. Were the Sumerian deities real beings? Of all the stories left behind by the Sumerians, none are more fascinating or more mysterious than those of their gods. They weren't distant, invisible spirits. The Sumerians believed their gods walked among them, lived in their temples, and ruled from the skies. But who were these beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, and why do their myths sound almost historical? The Sumerian pantheon was vast. There was Anu, the Sky Father, Enlil, the Lord of air and storms, Enki, the god of wisdom and creation, and Inanna, the goddess of love and war. But the Anunnaki, a mysterious collective of divine beings, were said to have descended from the heavens to shape human civilization. According to ancient texts, they created mankind not out of love, but necessity, to mine, farm, and serve their needs. The story goes that humans were fashioned from clay, mixed with the blood of a god, giving us both mortal and divine essence. It's poetic, but also eerily specific. This myth has sparked endless debate. Was it simply allegory, or could it hint at something more? Some fringe researchers, like Zecharia Sitchin, claimed the Anunnaki were ancient astronauts, advanced beings from another world who genetically engineered early humans. Mainstream scholars dismiss that as science fiction, pointing out that myth often personified natural forces. Yet the consistency of these tales across Mesopotamian cultures, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, keeps the curiosity alive. The gods weren't abstract symbols. They had detailed lineages, territories, and personalities. Inscriptions even describe their crafts that flew across the skies, shining like fire. Whether divine or symbolic, the Anunnaki shaped everything. Cities like Uruk and Eridu were built as cosmic centers, homes for these gods, designed with perfect geometry and alignment to the stars. Every aspect of Sumerian life revolved around appeasing these powerful beings. Festivals, music, and even architecture reflected their presence. Maybe the Sumerians were simply explaining the mysteries of nature, thunder, stars, life itself, in stories they could understand. Or maybe, as some believe, they were recording encounters with something we've forgotten. Whatever the truth, the legacy of the Anunnaki became the foundation for countless later deities, Egyptian, Greek, even biblical. The gods of Sumer never truly vanished, they just changed names. But while their gods looked to the heavens, the Sumerians also built incredible things right here on Earth, monuments that defied logic and time itself. How did the Sumerians build their ziggurats? When you think of ancient wonders, Egypt's pyramids usually steal the spotlight. But long before those rose from the desert sands, the Sumerians were already stacking clay bricks toward the sky. These massive step temples, called ziggurats, were the skyscrapers of the ancient world. Built thousands of years ago, they still baffle engineers today. How did a civilization without iron tools, cranes, or even the wheel, at first, manage to build such colossal structures? The ziggurats weren't simple mounds. They were mathematical masterpieces, layered terraces with precise angles, stairways, and chambers aligned to the stars. Each was dedicated to a specific god, serving as both temple and cosmic beacon. The most famous, the ziggurat of Ur, once stood over 100 feet tall, with 3 massive platforms built from millions of sun-dried bricks. Some of those bricks still bear the stamped names of kings, their inscriptions surviving the erosion of 4,000 years. What's remarkable is not just their size, but their purpose. The Sumerians believed these structures bridged heaven and earth. Priests would climb the ziggurat's grand staircase to make offerings to the gods, performing rituals at the summit that few mortals ever witnessed. From below, the sight must have been otherworldly, a mountain of brick glowing in the sun, towering over the flat Mesopotamian plains. But the real mystery lies in how they built them. Without pulleys, metal tools, or advanced scaffolding, it should have been nearly impossible to transport and stack such heavy materials. Some archaeologists think they used a system of ramps, while others suggest enormous communal labor forces, the ancestors of pyramid builders. The Sumerians also invented bitumen mortar, a tar-like substance that held their bricks together, making their temples remarkably durable. And here's something mind-blowing. When explorers studied the ruins of Ur's ziggurat, they found it was aligned almost perfectly with true north, a feat of engineering and astronomical knowledge that still puzzles experts. How did they do that without compasses or modern instruments? The ziggurats weren't just buildings, they were statements, proof that humanity could touch the divine through architecture and mathematics. They stood as both scientific and spiritual achievements, connecting the physical world to the cosmos above. But if their temples reached for the heavens, their inventions shaped the earth and changed human civilization forever. How the Sumerians built the modern world. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that almost everything we take for granted, from writing and math to farming and city life, all traces back to one ancient civilization. That's the Sumerians for you. They didn't just build temples, they built civilization itself. And their list of firsts is so long, it almost sounds made up. They invented the wheel, one of humanity's greatest breakthroughs. The earliest evidence of it comes from Sumerian clay tablets showing wagons rolling on 4 wheels around 3,500 BCE. This simple yet revolutionary idea reshaped transport, trade, and warfare, paving the literal road for progress. Then there's writing, cuneiform, which we've already seen turned memory into history. But they didn't stop there. The Sumerians created the first schools to train scribes, turning education into a profession. They also invented the calendar, dividing the year into 12 lunar months, and the sexagesimal system, which gave us 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. Systems we still use today. And don't forget irrigation. Mesopotamia, after all, was a tough place to live. A land between 2 unpredictable rivers. To survive, the Sumerians dug canals and dikes that tamed the floods and watered their crops. Their engineering turned a harsh floodplain into the cradle of civilization. Even their approach to government was groundbreaking. They introduced city-states, each ruled by kings who acted as earthly representatives of the gods. They also drafted some of the earliest laws, setting up justice systems where wrongdoers could be fined rather than simply punished. This laid the foundation for organized society, a world governed by reason, not just might. And perhaps the most human of all their inventions? Beer. Archaeologists found Sumerian tablets describing beer making and even songs praising it. It wasn't just a drink, it was a daily staple, clean, nutritious, and safer than water. Every modern civilization owes something to Sumer. From our clocks to our cities, our alphabets to our arithmetic, their fingerprints are everywhere. How a people living over 6,000 years ago managed to think so far ahead remains one of history's great puzzles. While their creations still shape our lives, another mystery lingers in their ruins: the abrupt, unexplained fall of the world's first great civilization. Why did the world's first civilization disappear? For a civilization that invented writing, architecture, and math, the Sumerians' ending is strangely quiet. One day, they were thriving, their cities bustling with trade and worship, and then, like a sandcastle washed away by the tide, they were gone. No epic battle, no single catastrophic event, just silence. So what really happened to the world's first great civilization? Archaeologists believe the answer isn't simple. Around 2000 BCE, Sumer began to face multiple crises at once. The climate shifted dramatically. The once fertile plains of Mesopotamia turned dry and salty. Centuries of irrigation had left behind layers of salt in the soil, choking crops and turning farmland into desert. Without food, people abandoned their cities. Meanwhile, invasions from neighboring groups like the Akkadians, Elamites, and later the Amorites destabilized the region. Cities that once cooperated under shared trade and religion began to fight for scarce resources. The great Sumerian city-states, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, fell one by one. But there's another theory. Some historians suggest the collapse wasn't just physical, but cultural. The very sophistication that made Sumer great, bureaucracy, rigid class systems, dependence on central temples, may have made it too fragile. When disaster struck, people couldn't adapt quickly enough. The system that once kept everything running eventually broke under its own weight. And then, history moved on. The Babylonians rose from Sumer's ashes, inheriting its writing, laws, and gods. The Sumerians themselves didn't vanish entirely. They were absorbed, their culture and language blending into new empires. But their identity, the people who called themselves the Black-Headed Ones, faded into history. Even now, archaeologists can only piece together fragments of their final days from shattered tablets and buried temples. There's no written record saying, "This is how it ended." It's as if the scribes simply stopped writing. It's haunting to think that the same civilization that gave humanity its first stories never got to write its own ending. The silence of Sumer is both tragic and poetic, a reminder that even the greatest societies can crumble without warning. Yet, for all their mysteries, some researchers believe the Sumerians left more than ruins. They may have passed down a legacy hidden deep within our myths, and maybe even our DNA. Did the Sumerians pass their knowledge to later civilizations? When the Sumerians vanished, their cities crumbled, and their language fell silent, but their influence never really died. It quietly lived on, absorbed and reshaped by every civilization that came after them. In a sense, Sumer didn't vanish. It evolved. Take the Babylonians, for instance. They inherited almost everything from the Sumerians, their writing system, gods, and mathematics. Babylonian cuneiform was just a refined version of Sumerian script, and their famous ruler Hammurabi based his laws on older Sumerian codes. Even the mythic flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh is a retelling of the Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, proving that their ideas outlived their nation by centuries. The Assyrians too carried Sumer's legacy forward. Their kings saw themselves as guardians of an ancient wisdom that began in Sumer, and they stored thousands of clay tablets in grand libraries, preserving much of what we know today. Without them, most of Sumer's history would have turned to dust. But Sumer's influence didn't stop in Mesopotamia. Some researchers argue that traces of Sumerian knowledge appear in ancient Egypt, which emerged not long after Sumer's peak. The Egyptians' use of irrigation, monumental architecture, and complex writing may have been inspired by early trade or contact with Mesopotamian peoples. Others even suggest the Sumerians influenced the Indus Valley civilization, whose seals and city layouts show uncanny similarities. And here's where it gets even more fascinating: language and myth. Words, symbols, and stories from Sumer quietly crept into later cultures. The concept of a paradise garden, a great flood, and divine kingship all originated in Sumer. Even the biblical Eden might have been inspired by Dilmun, a paradise described in Sumerian texts. Modern genetic and archaeological studies show how ancient migrations spread ideas across continents. It's entirely possible that the descendants of Sumer's people carried fragments of their culture far beyond the Euphrates. So while Sumer's name faded, its legacy became the blueprint for civilization. Every empire that followed, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, built upon Sumer's foundation, knowingly or not. The first written word, the first law, the first map, the first city, all were gifts from a civilization that time forgot. But there's one last mystery that might be the strangest of all. What if the Sumerians didn't just look to the stars? What if they believed they came from them? Did the Sumerians believe they came from the heavens? Now here's where the story takes a wild turn, one that has fascinated historians, dreamers, and conspiracy theorists alike. What if the Sumerians didn't just worship the heavens, but believed they were connected to them? Buried in their ancient texts and myths are strange clues that suggest the Sumerians thought their origins were celestial. In their writings, the gods, the Anunnaki, are described as descending from the stars to teach humanity knowledge, laws, and civilization itself. Unlike later religions where gods are spiritual or symbolic, the Sumerian ones had physical presence. They ate, slept, traveled, and even intermarried with humans. The question that still puzzles people today is, why were they so specific about their gods coming from the skies? The Sumerians even identified the home of their chief gods as a planet, one that moved differently from all the others. They called it Nibiru. Some modern theorists, like Zecharia Sitchin, believed that this 12th planet wasn't a myth at all, but a real celestial body that occasionally passed near Earth. According to his controversial interpretation, beings from Nibiru genetically modified early humans, jump-starting civilization. Of course, most archaeologists don't buy the alien angle. They argue that these stories were metaphors, poetic ways to describe natural forces, cosmic cycles, and humanity's yearning for the divine. The descent from heaven may have simply reflected the Sumerians' belief that wisdom and order came from above, from the skies, where the gods dwelled. Still, it's hard to deny how strangely scientific some of their descriptions sound. The Sumerians accurately charted planets, knew about their elliptical orbits, and even wrote of bright chariots of fire crossing the sky. Were these observations, imagination, or memories of something extraordinary? Regardless of how you interpret it, the Sumerians' fascination with the cosmos was real and deeply embedded in their culture. Every temple, festival, and myth revolved around the heavens. To them, the stars weren't distant lights. They were reminders of where life, law, and destiny began. And perhaps that's the real beauty of it. A people so ancient, yet so curious, that they looked at the night sky and saw both their past and their purpose. What can we, thousands of years later, truly learn from the world's first civilization? The Sumer teaching the modern world. Thousands of years may separate us from the Sumerians, but the lessons they left behind still echo through our modern world. They were the first to ask questions we're still trying to answer. Who are we? Where did we come from? What holds a society together? And in their rise and fall are clues about humanity's greatest strengths and deepest flaws. First, the Sumerians remind us that knowledge is the seed of civilization. They took simple tools and transformed them into innovations that defined human progress: writing, agriculture, mathematics, and law. Every smartphone, every city, every calendar owes a silent debt to Sumer. Their curiosity turned chaos into order, and that curiosity still drives science and discovery today. Second, they show the power and danger of ambition. Sumer's ziggurats and city-states were magnificent, but they also became fragile under their own complexity. Too much control, too much dependence on rigid systems made them unable to adapt when disaster struck. The same warning echoes now. No matter how advanced we become, civilizations that forget balance with nature and one another risk collapse. Third, Sumer teaches the importance of storytelling. The Sumerians didn't just invent writing to count grain, they used it to capture dreams, fears, and faith. The Epic of Gilgamesh wasn't just an old poem, it was humanity's first exploration of mortality and meaning. In that sense, every book, film, and song today traces its roots to those first clay tablets pressed by a Sumerian scribe. And finally, they remind us of our cosmic curiosity. Whether they truly believed they came from the stars or simply looked to them for guidance, the Sumerians reached beyond themselves. They dared to connect heaven and earth, divine and mortal, a mindset that still fuels space exploration, philosophy, and art. The world they built may be gone, but its echoes are everywhere. In our language, our laws, our architecture, even our imagination. Their story isn't just ancient history, it's the story of us. The same drive that made the Sumerians build cities in the desert still lives in every human dream to create, explore, and understand. Because long before we looked up at the stars and wondered who we are, the Sumerians were already asking the very same thing. The ancient Sumerians continue to challenge everything we think we know about the dawn of civilization. From their sudden appearance and advanced writing system to their inexplicable grasp of astronomy and mathematics, they remain an enigma wrapped in clay tablets and temple ruins. Each discovery about them opens more questions than answers. Who taught them so much, so early? How did they achieve such progress in isolation? Their legacy still shapes our modern world, from the way we measure time to the words we speak. Yet the full story of their origins and disappearance remains hidden in the dust of Mesopotamia. Perhaps that's the true power of the Sumerians. They remind us that human history is not a straight line, but a puzzle still missing pieces. Subscribe for more untold ancient mysteries that might just rewrite history. Also, we'd love to hear from you in the section below. Thanks for watching until the end.